So in today's video, I want to give you 5 tips to help make your webinar run more smoothly. So if that interests you, go ahead and hit the subscribe button and stay tuned. So it occurred to me that I had never made a video about teaching webinars, which is kind of ridiculous because I teach them very frequently and I've been teaching them for the last decade. So over the years, I have developed a number of little tricks and techniques that have helped my webinars to run more smoothly, and I'm going to share those with you today. So tip number 1, idiot-proof your webinar in any way possible. So I'll start the webinar like 5 to 10 minutes early, and I will screen share this welcome message. And it will say something like, we'll begin in a few minutes. Please make sure you have the following. And it'll be a little checklist of everything that they need for the class. And I've really found that this has cut down dramatically on people forgetting that they needed to download something. I'll also provide them with like a link as to where to get it. It also helps to cut down on tech issues because in the webinar format that I use the program GoToWebinar. People need to use a headset or headphones. And if they don't, there's a really bad echo and a lot of feedback. So one of the things I do in this welcome message is I include a bullet point that says, please note, you will need to use headphones or a headset for this webinar. If you are just relying on your computer speakers, there will be a lot of feedback and noise, which will be distracting for everyone. And I find that not just saying what they need, but giving a little of the why, like it's going to be an annoyance, has really dramatically cut down on people just not being prepared, not testing their settings. Now, I don't care if you've sent emails the night before, the week before, the morning of, with the materials. In large classes of humans, you will inevitably find that there are some folks who are unprepared, even though you did everything in your power to prepare them. And so having to kind of troubleshoot and handhold eats up a lot of time. Whatever it is, this is your chance to just provide a little checklist, and that will definitely cut down on the amount of people not being prepared. Tip number 2, use your mute button. Now, I have heard all kinds of stories about how noisy some of these webinars are and how distracting it is for everyone. And in my webinars, I keep everybody muted as a rule, unless they're asking a question or I have them doing an exercise, or there's a discussion going on. I typically have the power to mute and unmute everyone. And if you don't, or you haven't had that before, I suggest that you look into the program you're using and you check the settings, because sometimes you need to select something that will allow you to be able to mute and unmute people. But I highly suggest you use this option because, again, if you rely on the participants to remember to mute themselves, it won't happen. Inevitably, you'll have 1 or 2 people, or maybe more, who have the button unmuted and are crinkling potato chip bags and sorting their recycling and having a marching band come down their street. I don't know what goes on. I just know that it's always the noisiest people who forget to mute themselves. Take advantage of the fact that you are the organizer, you are the leader, you are the instructor, and it's up to you to make sure everybody has a good experience. And part of that experience is controlling the distractions and the background noise. So I highly suggest you use that mute button and keep your participants muted until they have a specific question for you. Now, obviously, if you're doing something that is more of a meeting or discussion format, you can't have that. But the kinds of webinars that I teach, and I know many people are teaching out there, are maybe lecture style, and then there will be some interactive component. You want the focus to be on what you're teaching, what you're saying. Or if you're having students do exercises, you want to make sure that the student who is participating in the moment is not distracted by somebody else, talking to their wife or something in the background, right? So I think that using that has really, really made a big difference in making it a more enjoyable experience for everyone. Tip 3, start with an outline at the beginning of class, but make sure you don't get overly complicated with it. what I find is it takes some of the mystery and questioning out of how the class is going to run, and it tends to give people a sense of security. It's like, you know, having a map so they know where they're going. And when I say keep it simple, I might say something like part 1, introduction, part 2, lecture, part 3, applying what you've learned, part 4, question and answer. So don't get too stuck on all of the kind of subheadings, you know, of your outline. But this is also the time to let them know if there's going to be a brief break depending on how long your webinar is. I know for myself, I've learned that I absolutely need to take short little breaks to go refill my water glass, to go to the restroom. But what I will do is when I mention we're just going to take a short 3-minute break so that I can go refill my water glass or go to the restroom, but feel free if any questions have come up to go ahead and type them into the chat feature or raise your virtual hand, and when I come back I'll address them. So it's a nice little prompt to again remind them to ask questions. Tip number 4, create clear rules around questions and answers and really stick to it. So what I mean by that is I will state at the beginning of class that at the end of class, I always save a chunk of time for general question and answer, and people are welcome to ask anything and I'll answer it to the best of my ability. But feel free to ask questions as we go, as long as they are relevant to the topic at hand, and stick to that rule. Otherwise, people just go off topic and you go down paths you didn't intend to, and it gets very, very distracting. So if somebody asks a question that is not on topic, just kindly redirect them and just say, you know, that's a great question, but it's a bit more general, so I'd like to save that for the end of class question and answer discussion. So please remind me, please ask that question again. But does anybody else have any other questions on this topic, right? So you definitely want to create that dialogue, but you want to control it because people do have a terrible habit of asking random questions and things get off track very quickly, and that's how you can really, really lose a lot of time. Speaking of time, my tip number 5 is to do everything in your power to manage your time. I know that as a webinar participant, it is so irritating to me when I've planned in my day this 2 or 3 or in some cases 4-hour class. And then all of a sudden, because the instructor hasn't managed their time and they've run out of time and they haven't taught everything they needed to, all of a sudden the class runs over by an hour. I've had classes run over by 2 hours. You know, and sometimes I was ready to decompress and go make dinner and have a drink at that time, right? So I think that it's really on you to manage your time effectively. And one of the things that can eat up a lot of time and isn't always important or relevant for the people in class are things like check-ins or introductions. So really question whether that is something needed for your particular webinar. Now, if you're teaching one in a series and this is the first webinar, then yes, you can allow more time for introductions because people are going to be working together over the course of several weeks or months or whatever it is. But if it's a one-off webinar, things like introductions can really eat up a lot of time. So you want to either think about eliminating it or just think about ways to minimize it and keep it short. So I might say something like, all right, I'm going to go down my list here real quick, but we're under a tight schedule. So I just want to hear where you're located and just a couple of words about what made you want to take this webinar, right? So that's a nice way to keep it on track. But again, when and if possible, I suggest maybe eliminating things like that, because at the end of the day, people have signed up for this webinar to hear your lesson and to hear you talk. They didn't sign up to hear about Bob's juggling hobby that he picked up in college or Lorraine's chia pet collection or whatever it is. No offense to Bob and Lorraine, right? But just try to keep things focused and on track. And I would love to hear from you. What are some of your pet peeves when you've either taken a webinar or some problems that you've encountered when teaching a webinar? And please share them in the comments below. So that's that. But if you like this video, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. And thank you so much for watching. Bye.